On Fergie, emails between her and Epstein seem to show that she may have had a crush on him.
Sarah Ferguson breaks 30 years of silence. The royals destroyed my life. That's not just a dramatic headline. That's an accusation wrapped in heartbreak, buried under 3 million pages of federal documents, and splashed across a world that suddenly had to confront a name it thought it already understood. Because when the 2026 U.S. Department of Justice release detonated across headlines, most people expected billionaires, politicians, shadowy elites. What they didn't expect was Fergie, not as a footnote, not as a distant acquaintance, but front and center. Email after email, plea after plea. A former duchess allegedly begging a convicted predator for employment. Let that sink in. A woman who once stood on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, reduced, at least on paper, to asking, "Can't you simply hire me as your domestic assistant?" And before you rush to judgment, before you sharpen the outrage, you need to understand something far more unsettling than scandal. This wasn't a fall. It was a slow collapse. And the collapse began decades earlier, inside the palace walls. Picture it. Westminster Abbey, 1986. A 26-year-old redhead with contagious laughter walks down the aisle to marry Prince Andrew, second son of Queen Elizabeth II. The world cheers. The tabloids beam. She's different, they say. Refreshing. Real. She laughs too loudly. She hugs too freely. She wears colors that don't whisper, they shout. And that right there was the first crack. Because the royal institution does not reward individuality. It tolerates it briefly. Then it disciplines it. Sarah Ferguson was not built for silent corridors and invisible rules. She had personality. And personality inside a monarchy is a liability. At first, the press adored her. Fergie was affectionate, almost protective. She played with her children in public. She made faces. She felt human in a family sculpted from marble. But here's the dangerous truth. The British press builds idols only to demolish them. And the palace knows it. They've watched it happen before. What they didn't do, what they never truly did, was protect her from it. Because unlike Diana, Sarah wasn't married to the heir. She was married to the spare. In royal hierarchy, that's not just a technicality. That's a downgrade in protection, in priority, in patience. She had the title. She didn't have the insulation. Now let's talk money. Because money was the silent villain in this story long before Epstein's name ever entered it. Royal life is not optional luxury. It is mandatory extravagance. Floral arrangements alone reportedly cost $50,000 a year. Wardrobes soared past $100,000. Gifts? $150,000. Appearances demanded it. The image demanded it. And yet, here's the detail that rarely gets spotlighted. Sarah Ferguson had no salary, no sovereign grant, no structured stipend matching the lifestyle she was expected to perform. She was required to live like royalty without being funded like royalty. Do you see the trap forming? During her marriage, annual expenditure reportedly reached $860,000. That number gets thrown around like evidence of greed. But what if it was evidence of structural absurdity? She was living inside a system that normalized immense spending without equipping her to sustain it. There was no financial training, no quiet briefing that said, "Here's what this life will cost you. Here's how you'll survive it." There was just assumption. Figure it out. And when she didn't, the bills piled like bricks in a collapsing tower. One shopping trip allegedly drained $25,000 in under an hour. The headlines screamed recklessness, but context whispers something different. She was surrounded by billionaires, aristocrats, heads of state. In that world, $25,000 isn't indulgence, it's expectation. Retailers tolerated unpaid balances because of who she was. Invoices accumulated, quietly, indefinitely. By 1995, reports suggest she needed bank approval even for small checks. A duchess, unable to write freely from her own account. That's not decadence, that's dependency. And when creditors threatened public embarrassment, who stepped in? Queen Elizabeth II herself, reportedly issuing a $500,000 emergency payment in 1994 to settle an ultimatum. Not out of maternal affection, out of institutional preservation. The monarchy could not afford headlines about bailiffs knocking on royal doors. It was crisis containment. And once the marriage ended in 1996, the containment ended too. The scaffolding vanished. She was left facing debts reportedly surpassing $4 million. The fairy tale didn't just end, it defaulted. But here's what makes this story more complicated than caricature. She didn't disappear. She hustled. Weight Watchers, book deals, endorsements. In 1997, she became the first British royal to commercially endorse products on American television, securing $500,000 from Ocean Spray. That's not laziness, that's survival instinct. She appeared on Larry King Live in 2001, acknowledging financial mistakes with unsettling candor. It looked like reinvention. It felt like stability. But stability built on debt can crumble overnight. By 2007, her foundation's financial discrepancies raised eyebrows. Lawsuits surfaced. Unpaid invoices echoed the past. Patterns don't just vanish, they resurface in new disguises. Then came 2009. Her lifestyle enterprise collapsed. Reported debts reached $600,000. Investments evaporated. She was 50, financially cornered. And this is the precise moment Jeffrey Epstein enters the narrative. Let's be precise. In 2008, Epstein pleaded guilty to soliciting prostitution involving a minor, served 13 months under a plea deal widely criticized for its leniency. In 2009, while he was still incarcerated, emails allegedly show Sarah Ferguson contacting him, seeking bankruptcy guidance, discussing liquidation of jewelry, exploring rescue from billionaires, throwing every desperate idea at the wall. And here is where the story fractures into two competing realities. Reality 1, she knowingly associated with a convicted offender, making her morally compromised. Reality 2, she was drowning financially, reaching for anyone in her wealthy orbit who could throw a rope. Which is true? Maybe both. Maybe neither fully. What we do know is this. Correspondence allegedly shows her organizing a Miami lunch with Epstein that included her daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie. She treated him as safe, trusted. That miscalculation would shadow her permanently. Then, May 2010 detonated. Hidden cameras. An undercover journalist. $40,000 in cash accepted on tape with promises that $500,000 would secure access to Prince Andrew. 4 seconds of audio. 4 decades of reputation shredded. She apologized immediately, called it rock bottom. But here's the chilling layer that surfaced years later, days before that footage aired. An email allegedly dated May 16, 2010 was sent to Epstein. Can't you simply hire me as your domestic assistant? I possess exceptional capabilities and desperately require employment. Read that again. A former duchess pleading for a housekeeping job from a convicted predator. What do you feel reading that? Disgust? Pity? Fury? Because your reaction says as much about society as it does about her. Some commentators labeled it moral collapse. Others framed it as financial desperation metastasized into catastrophic judgment. Both interpretations coexist uncomfortably. And here's the detail that tightens the knot. In March 2011, reports surfaced that Epstein transferred $15,000 to a Ferguson employee, allegedly coordinated through Prince Andrew. She publicly called it a massive judgment error and vowed to sever ties. But later leaked correspondence suggested she privately apologized to Epstein for distancing herself publicly. Contradiction, hypocrisy, or the behavior of someone too financially cornered to burn a lifeline, even a toxic one? This isn't clean. It's not cinematic villainy. It's messy human survival colliding with catastrophic association. And as more documents surface, as Prince Andrew faces scrutiny, as companies linked to her dissolve and Royal Lodge slips from her grasp, the question intensifies. Was this self-destruction or systemic abandonment? Because once you understand the pattern, once you trace the financial desperation, the institutional distance, the toxic lifelines, something far more unsettling begins to surface. This was never just about one sting operation. It was never just about one email. It was about a 40-year tug of war between identity and survival. And survival, when it becomes chronic, starts to distort judgment in ways that look from the outside like greed, arrogance, even corruption. But inside it feels like oxygen. Fast forward to now. Companies associated with Sarah Ferguson proceeding toward dissolution. Reported deficits stacking against shrinking assets. A lifestyle brand showing hundreds of thousands in obligations against tens of thousands in remaining funds. That's not royal opulence. That's financial erosion. Her children's book publisher withdrawing support. Charitable relationships severed. One by one, the structures she rebuilt over 2 decades disintegrating almost simultaneously. Patterns again. Always patterns. You build. You fall. You build. You fall harder. And then there is Royal Lodge, the 30-room Windsor estate she shared with Prince Andrew for years. Not just a property, a psychological anchor. A reminder that despite divorce, scandal, humiliation, she was still orbiting the world she once entered in white lace at Westminster Abbey. Now that anchor loosens. She must vacate. The physical symbol of proximity to royalty dissolves, just as the documents tie her name permanently to Jeffrey Epstein in millions of federal pages. The timing is almost cinematic. As the house empties, the past fills headlines. And Prince Andrew, arrested February 19, 2026, on misconduct suspicions related to his former trade envoy role, allegations he disputes. Flight logs at UK airports used by Epstein's private jet examined by police. The walls tightening around him, around her, around the entire narrative of a spare prince and a duchess who were always slightly off-center in a monarchy obsessed with center lines. Two storms, same coordinates. Now here's the silence that screams louder than scandal. For 30 years, Sarah Ferguson never truly detonated the full truth of her experience inside the royal machine. She spoke. She apologized. She laughed at herself. She acknowledged mistakes. But she never tore the curtain down. Why? Because the monarchy is not just family. It is legal architecture. It is financial leverage. It is access to daughters who remain princesses. To speak too loudly would risk litigation, exile, permanent severance. Silence is often the last currency someone in her position can spend. And she guarded it. But silence costs. It costs clarity. It costs narrative control. It allows others to define you. Tabloids did. Commentators did. Even analysts who offered sympathy framed her primarily through poor financial discipline. One former BBC royal correspondent said she needed to master a fundamental principle: live within your means. Fair? Yes. Complete? Not even close. Because what were her means? A title without income. A role without salary. An expectation of grandeur without institutional funding once divorce severed formal ties. She was expected to look royal forever. She was funded royal temporarily. This gap between expectation and resource never closed. Every endorsement deal, every questionable business venture, every reckless seeming decision can be traced back to that fracture. She was trying to sustain an identity that required wealth while operating without consistent wealth. That psychological tension doesn't disappear. It compounds. Let's talk about financial trauma. Chronic instability rewires decision-making. Scarcity narrows focus to immediate relief. When someone has lurched from crisis to crisis for decades, long-term consequences start to blur under short-term survival. That doesn't absolve behavior, but it contextualizes it. The undercover sting cash, immediate relief. The email asking for employment, immediate relief. The private apology contradicting a public vow to sever ties, keeping a door open just in case. It reads ugly. It reads desperate. Because it was desperate. And desperation inside proximity to power is combustible. Epstein did not exclusively prey on the traditionally vulnerable. He cultivated access. He positioned himself as a solution. He inserted himself into networks where people needed something: money, connection, validation. Sarah Ferguson in 2009-2010 fit that profile precisely. Famous name, fragile finances, urgent need for stabilization. She was not the architect of the web. She was caught in it. That distinction doesn't erase accountability, but it reframes power dynamics. Zoom out. The DOJ release exposed a network of elites entangled with Epstein, politicians, billionaires, royalty. Sarah Ferguson's name ignited because of contrast. Duchess to alleged domestic assistant plea. The fall felt theatrical, but many others were in those pages, quietly, strategically. She became symbol because she was already perceived as fragile. Now consider something rarely asked. Was she ever structurally positioned to succeed long-term? She entered the monarchy young, energetic, informal. That very informality later became ammunition. She was celebrated for being human until humanity became inconvenient. The institution demands conformity, silence, submission. She possessed personality. Personality draws headlines. Headlines evolve into scrutiny. Scrutiny into narrative. Narrative into legacy. When she told Oprah she hit rock bottom in 2010, she did not narrate the 30-year runway leading to that crater. She did not detail what it felt like to be bailed out by the Queen while simultaneously branded embarrassment. She did not unpack what it means to mother two princesses while drowning in debt. She did not articulate the psychological whiplash of being both insider and outsider. And maybe she couldn't, because to articulate it fully would require confronting an institution still tethered to her daughter's futures. So what are we left with? A disgraced duchess, a convicted predator, a royal family maintaining pristine institutional silence, and a public oscillating between outrage and sympathy. Is she villain? Victim? Warning? Maybe she is a cautionary tale about financial mismanagement. Maybe she is evidence of how systems create dependency then disown it. Maybe she is both simultaneously. The company's dissolving, the estate vacated, the arrest headlines orbiting her ex-husband, the emails archived forever in federal repositories. This is not a neat redemption arc. It's ongoing tension. Documents still being analyzed, flight logs still examined, allegations still contested. The story is not closed. It is metastasizing. And here is the most uncomfortable question of all. When the definitive history of the British royal family's late 20th and early 21st centuries is written without palace filtration, Where does Sarah Ferguson sit in that narrative? As reckless? As tragic? As a woman structurally unprepared for a role that demanded infinite performance with finite support? The truth may lie in the space between those labels. Because beneath the scandal, beneath the email that still echoes, "I desperately require employment," is a human being who spent 4 decades trying to reconcile a public identity with private instability. She was handed the keys to one of the most powerful institutions on earth. Then, piece by piece, those keys were taken back. Or perhaps they were never truly hers. 3 million pages, a name buried yet blazing, a silence maintained yet cracking, and a lingering uncertainty that refuses to settle. Did the royals destroy her life, or did she dismantle it, chasing solutions to a problem the system created? The documents are still being read, the investigations continue, and somewhere in the shadow between palace gates and federal archives, Sarah Ferguson is still trying to survive the story that refuses to end.